Hi there, Ollie Anderson here. You're listening to Creative Status. This is a podcast about using your creativity to improve your life. If you haven't listened before, it basically entails interviews with creative people, spiritual people, interesting people, basically, where we explore their human experience, but also the philosophical, psychological, and to some extent, dare I say it, spiritual side of the creative process. One theme that has come up so many times already in these conversations is the idea that as you go through the creative process, you become more open to life itself. And as a byproduct of that, you also become more open to who you are without any judgment, really, of the parts of yourself that society may have conditioned you to disown, or that you may have become ashamed of, or that you may feel guilty about, or that you may even have trauma that you need to get over because you've created a self-image or a way of identifying with yourself that holds you back from truly connecting to other people. I remember in the first episode, the first interview that I did, I was talking to Sabrina Lindner, a friend of mine, and she basically said that you have to be open to life to receive from life. And this is something that's come up so many times. And it basically comes down to the idea that if you want to really get something from life, if you want to live to the maximum and experience as much as you can, and ideally get the results that you want from life by doing that, then eventually you need to start giving. And the best thing or the realest thing that you can give is your real self. And if you're doing the creative process properly, then all you're really doing is unblocking all of the things that stop you or hold you back from being aware of and then expressing something of your real self in the world. If you can do that, then you actually have a lot to give. And giving is what allows you to actually receive more from life, because it opens you up to the interplay between all things. Ultimately, you live as an open system when you're giving. And I'm getting ahead of myself as usual, but that theme, giving, is the main topic of today's interview on Creative Status. It's an interview with a guy called Bob Burg. He co-authored a book with a guy called John David Mann called The Go-Giver. This is a really influential book, and it seems to be becoming more influential in the creative communities. Basically, it shares 5 laws that we can apply to our lives and the way that we do business. We'll talk about those in the interview itself, obviously. But these laws ultimately all revolve around the idea of how if you can give more to life, then you will receive more from life. And it talks about the mental shifts that this process of understanding and implementing these laws will take you through. And it's really, really valuable and really, really interesting, especially if you're a creative person and you're trying to do something in a kind of business sense, I guess, with your creative work. So I won't say too much, but this interview is a bit shorter than the other Creative Status interviews so far, but it does have a lot of value in there. We go over the 5 laws, we look at how you can implement them in life and business, and hopefully by the end of this interview, you're going to be more inspired to go out there and give something real of yourself so you can get better results from life and basically do all the things that we talk about in this podcast, which is using your creativity to improve your life and to start living a real life that you really care about and really want to live. So thank you so much to Bob for giving me his time, letting me interview him. Hope you enjoyed this interview. I'm sure you will. And that's it. I'll see you on the next episode of Creative Status. Here we go. Oh, hi there, Bob. Thank you for joining me today on Creative Status. You're the author of a book that a lot of people seem to be talking about recently, especially within the creative community, The Go-Giver. What we're going to try and do today is kind of look at the overlap between the core philosophy that you share, which is ultimately about the idea that the more you give, the more you have. That's a quote that I saw on your Instagram profile earlier. But looking at how that philosophy works through a creative lens. Before I start asking you a ton of questions, do you just want to introduce yourself and tell people how you ended up kind of coming up with this philosophy of giving in the first place?
Well, I had seen this in business, and I began in sales, and I just saw that those people who are focused on giving value to others, and that's really when John David Mann, my excellent co-author, and I, when we talk about giving, that's really what we mean. We're talking about a focus on providing immense value to others, which can take a lot of creativity to do, right? And what I'd always notice is those people who had that laser focus on making other people's lives better.
Mm,
Uh, these are the people who are the sustainably most successful, top money earning people as well. So it's not just a matter of feeling good about what you're doing, though that's very very important. It's a matter of it's both um, a very fulfilling way of conducting business and the most financially profitable way as well. So, John and I both, he was the editor in chief of a magazine I was writing for. And, we both, in talking about it, had very similar philosophies, had noticed very similar things. We'd both been entrepreneurs and had done a study of success. And these are what we found. And so the five principles, what we call the laws of stratospheric success that we share in the parable, the Go Giver, it's really just really an overview of what we found that that works for people constantly and consistently.
that's amazing. So the Go Giver, for people that don't know, is a parable, like you said. It's a very easy book to read, but it revolves around kind of five laws that I think can be applicable in almost any situation in life. So I know that you said you came at it from a business point of view, but I personally think, from what I've seen in my own life as a creative and as just a human being, the ideas you share about giving kind of open us up to being a much more real, much more authentic human being. So the five laws that you share in the book are the law of value, the law of compensation, the law of influence, the law of authenticity, and the law of receptivity. How would you sum up those five laws just quickly, if you could?
Well, the first one is all about making the experience so fantastic. So it's, regardless of what you do in terms of your profession, what, the product or service you sell, that's important. And it needs to add so much value in and of itself to another person that it's worth it for them to exchange their money for it or their time or their effort or what have you. But it's
Mm,
more than just the product or service itself. It's the experience that they receive throughout the process. It's the excellence that you provide. It's the consistency you provide. It's the attention to them as a human being that you provide. It's the empathy that
mm,
you provide. It's the um, it's the it's the appreciation that you provide. So
wow.
when we put all these things together, the first law says, really, you're giving them so much value in the experience itself that they just come away from it feeling great, as though it's much more than any kind of um, financial exchange they may have made.
Mm. I think from a creative point of view, that's really, really interesting. I think a lesson that a lot of creative people learn, especially if they're trying to build a business or something around their creativity, is that it does come down to the value that you provide as a whole. And I think if people don't understand that, the mindset that they have with their creativity or their creative projects can actually be quite an egotistical kind of thing because they're thinking about the value that they want to receive from their creative work. So they might be thinking, for example, that they want to get adoration, they want to get applause, they just want to make money. All these different things stop them from thinking about the actual value that they can provide by looking for ways to kind of really create something that truly connects to people on a very human level. Do
Yeah.
you think that's a fair assessment of that rule?
Absolutely. It's all about moving our focus off of ourselves and onto others. Not in a self-sacrificial way at all,
Mm,
but just in a way that understanding. Here's the thing. When I speak at sales conferences, one of the first things I'll often say is nobody's going to do business with you because you have a quota to meet,
mm,
right? They're not going to do business with you because you need the money. And they're not even going to do business with you just because you're a really nice person. They're going to do business with you because they believe that they will ultimately be better off by doing so than by not doing so. Now,
Mm,
that's not a bad thing. That's just human nature, right? But this is great news for that person who can really find creative ways to focus on the value they can provide to another human being. This is why John David Mann and I say that money is simply an echo of value. It's the thunder to value's lightning. It just simply means the value must be your focus, bringing value to others. The money is simply a natural result of the value you've provided them. Now, here's the thing. Does it works for money? Sure, but it also works for love, for
mm,
friendship, right? It works for, anything that you want to receive to the degree that you're able to give that and to do that effectively, you've got to focus on that other person.
mm.
Uh, and that's really, that's really how it works. That's how life works.
Yeah. That's one of the things I really love about the Go Giver as a whole. This idea that you can take yourself through that mental shift, but also by taking yourself through that mental shift of being focused on other people instead of yourself, you will actually get better results anyway from life, because the nature of human beings, like you've kind of just said, is that we're value based creatures. And in exchange for value, we get value from others. A lot of people don't necessarily realize that when they set out with their own business or with a creative project. Um, is there something that you might be able to say about how we can set out on a creative journey or even a business project with that in mind? Like, how do we, from the very get go, start to keep the value we provide to others in mind?
Well, we always have to understand something about value itself, and that is that it's always in the eyes of the beholder. So,
Mm,
while price is a dollar figure, right, or euros, or pounds, or uh, you know, pesos, or whatever it happens to be, shekels,
mm,
whatever it happens to be. That's price. Okay, it's finite. It is what
mm,
it is. Value, on the other hand, is the relative worth or desirability of a thing, of something to the end
mm,
user. In other words, what is it about this thing, this product, service, concept, idea, what have you, that brings so much worth to another person that they will willingly exchange, again, their time or their money or their energy or their love or whatever it happens to be?
mm,
Now, the key, though, is that it's always about the other person. It's not
mm,
what we think is of value, and it's not what we think they should think is of value. It's what they think is of value. So now, how do we get creative in order to provide this value as they understand it to be of value? We must discover. We must ask questions.
mm.
Because as human beings, we believe that everybody else sees the world basically the same way we do. Not on a conscious level, but unconsciously, it's what we think. Because why? It's how we see the world,
Mm,
right? The
mm,
combination of upbringing, environment, schooling, news media, television shows, movies. We've been receiving messages mostly unconsciously throughout our lives, and we formed our worldviews from there. And we tend to believe that other people see the world the same way. This is why, if you've ever heard someone say, "Oh, everybody likes that," well, that's not necessarily true. Or,
mm,
"Oh, no one would want that." Well, that's not necessarily true. Or, "I would never treat someone that way." No, you wouldn't, because it's not congruent with your belief system. But we don't know what other people find to be of value. So we
mm.
must ask questions and then creatively listen.
Wow.
Not listen in order to just, kind of get how we can then put our agenda to that, right? But I
Mm,
mean, listen with our entire being, not just with
mm.
our eyes, not just with our ears, but with our eyes, with our posture, you know,
Yeah.
uh, really, I mean, physically and literally and figuratively with our posture, right? Really lean in to
Mm,
really understand and to clarify and to tactfully and gently ask them to clarify when we're not sure that what they said is what we understood. And
mm,
and so when we listen, when we ask questions and listen, that other person is going to tell us what it is they're looking for,
mm,
what it is they find to be of value, what it is that they need, what they want, what they desire. Now we're in a position to give value to them in a way that they see it as being of value.
Wow. I really love everything you just said, and I think it's so important, but it also says a lot about the creative process as a whole. I think that a lot of the time when people set out on these creative journeys, the idea or expectation that they have for the creative project is usually initially a reflection of what they want the world to think about them or what they want to get from the world in the way that we said. Really, that's all just conceptual. It's ego stuff. It's linked to their identity a lot of the time. And it's only if you go out and actually research and really dig into what your audience wants and ask them questions and you talk to them and all that kind of stuff that you can get feedback from reality that is going to allow you to create something that's more valuable as a whole. So I think just as a reminder to a lot of the people listening to this, that is a really, really, really important point, which is that the only way to really make yourself valuable is to go find out what the world actually values and then to tweak your ideas in relation to that and to kind of feed into demand that's already out there.
Beautifully stated. Yeah.
That's sorry.
I said that was beautifully stated. That was absolutely perfect.
Wow, thank you. And it's all comes down to what you said, that we're value based creatures ultimately. So
Mm.
we can increase our own value through understanding in the way that you've said, and then we can go out and give people more of what they want. Let's
Exactly.
quickly look at the second law, which kind of feeds into the first one, obviously. The second law in the book is what you
Yeah.
call the law of compensation. The succinct version of describing it, if I get it right, is that ultimately the more people you can affect, or the more people you can impact, with your work, then the better results you're going to get. And probably in terms of compensation in a business sense, you'll get more money for impacting more people.
Exactly.
How would you say that might apply to people that have kind of creative projects that they're trying to turn into a business? Just off the top of your head, is there anything there?
Well, you've got to ask yourself how you're going to scale that creative project,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And finding more people to serve is an act of creation itself.
Mm,
Uh, obviously, the more people who love what you do, they're going to tell others about it, and you're going to be able to impact more people's lives. Um, but we're also very big believers in having a referral system so that you can actually that how so that when you have a very ecstatic customer or client, you can ask them for referrals in such a way that they're going to be able to come up with names of people to be able to introduce you to.
mm,
And so yes, it's a matter of, the law of value that represents your potential income, but it's not enough to be able to, it's not enough to just serve one person, no matter how exceptional your value is.
mm,
Okay. You've got
yeah.
to be able to impact the lives. And that's why what Nicole Martin, the CEO in the story, told Joe, the protege. She said, yeah, value is your potential income, but the law of compensation is based on how many lives you touch, how
Right.
many people's lives you impact with that value.
And I suppose the other thing is all of these laws obviously are interconnected. So if you do the work you just said with the first
Mm.
law of figuring out how you can maximize the value you offer, then that also increases the amount of people that you are going to impact. Because, like you said, if you create something that's truly valuable to other human beings, then they're going to tell other human beings about it, and you're going to build a community, hopefully, around it, around your project, which will feed into your referral systems and all that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly.
Um, there are other things you can do as well, I suppose, just for the compensation law. For example, people need to work on choosing a niche that actually is going to be marketable, that is going to have people in there with an actual burning desire or whatever it is, where your value is going to solve their problems. And I suppose it comes down to choosing the right medium as well. So if you
Well,
I don't know, if you do a podcast or something and no one's listening to it versus going on YouTube and letting their algorithm share the value, for example, then those kind of creative decisions are going to affect your compensation as well.
yeah, I think the niche you choose is going to that first. It's so very important. I call it the marketing bridge, and that is, does your potential customer or niche, do they need what you have to offer? Do they
Mm,
want what you have to offer? And can they afford what you have
yes.
to offer? Now,
Yes.
depending upon what you do, need might not be an issue. It might be just something that someone wants. Okay. And
Mm,
that's fine. You can skip past need. Do they want it? And can they afford it? Now, what we find is first, if someone needs it, that doesn't mean they're going to want it, right? It might be a market that needs your services, but they're just not ready for it yet. And you have a decision to make. Do you want to invest time and money and energy developing that market so that they do want it?
mm,
Uh, or do you want to instead work on something where there's already a market that's proven themselves to want your type of product
mm,
and just work that particular market? And again, there's no one right answer. It depends on a number of variables. But if someone needs it, they generally, or if someone needs it and they want it,
mm.
now, there's a good chance they can probably afford it because let's face it, if someone doesn't feel they need something or doesn't want something, well, they can't afford it because who can afford something you don't want?
Yeah, yeah.
So, so we've got to, we've always got to look at truths and utilize those truths. It's not a matter. Well, we'd really like this group of people, this niche. I'd love to serve this niche, but they don't need it or want it. But I
Mm,
want to serve them. Well, you've got a decision to make.
yeah.
Are you gonna try and again develop it, or are you going to go on to maybe somewhere else that you can serve and who want to be served by you, but then maybe in time you come back and you work that particular niche. So again, it really depends. But yes, so you're absolutely right. The right niche is absolutely because you can when you have a niche and you can really niche down, you become that expert, you become that resource, you become that trusted resource. And
Mm,
that's actually much more financially profitable than trying to be everything to everyone, in which case you're often nothing to no one.
yeah.
And then, as you said, the right medium or right platform.
Mm,
Uh, is also very important. So, obviously you want to kind of research where the people who are doing what you do, where they generally tend to be, because that's a good sign that it's working, right?
mm, mm,
That doesn't mean you can't experience. Again, be creative, experience with different platforms and different media, but live in truths. Do your research in the right way
mm.
and make sure that you don't just stick with something because you'd like it to work as opposed to indications it's going to work.
Yeah. I 100% agree with that. And I think it's so important. I think a lot of the creative process is actually just about moving more closely to what actually works in reality, because reality is the only place where you're going to get any results. And so if you don't do some of this work that you're talking about from the get-go, and you don't figure out your value, don't look at how you're perceived, don't figure out the niche that you're working in and all these different things, then you're actually going to be taking yourself away from the opportunity to get results that actually work. And so the process, I think, is about going through all of these different stages. Let me jump onto the third law, which is the law of influence. This is a really important law, I think, and it's kind of about the mental shift we already kind of alluded to earlier in the conversation, but it ultimately comes down to this idea that if you put other people first, then it will actually increase the influence that you can make in the world, which seems paradoxical to a lot of people. But in my experience, it definitely does work. Why do you think it's important for creative people or business people to understand this? And also, why do you think it works, even though it's paradoxical?
Okay, well, first, it works, even though it's paradoxical, because it ties in with human nature, with the truths of human nature. And that is, people care more about themselves than they do about you.
Yep.
Okay. So, so if your focus is on yourself, they're probably not as interested.
Yeah.
Right
Yeah. Yeah.
now. It's so important to understand this, especially as a creative, because as a creative, you really love what you do. You believe in what you do. You are often in love with what you do. And it's difficult to realize that your marketplace, they're not in love with it, not
Mm,
until they know about it and are immersed in it. Okay.
mm,
They are, Dale Carnegie in How to Win Friends and Influence People made one of the greatest statements I think that's ever been written. And that is, he wrote, ultimately, people do things for their reasons,
mm,
not our reasons.
mm,
So trying to have someone buy your work because you think it's the most amazing thing in the world is meaningless to them. It's
mm,
always got to be about the other person. So when we say placing other people's interests first, we don't mean you should be self-sacrificial. We
mm,
don't mean you should be a martyr. We don't mean you should be a doormat. Of course, absolutely not at all. It's simply understanding that, as Joe, the protege in the story, learned from several of the mentors, the golden rule of business, of sales, is that all things being equal, people will do business with and refer business to those people they know, like, and
Mm,
trust.
mm,
And there's no faster, more powerful, or more effective way to elicit those feelings toward you from others than by genuinely moving from that I focus or me focus to that other focus, looking for ways to, as Sam, one of the mentors, advised Joe, to make your win all about the other person's win.
yeah, beautiful. I think ultimately this law is about enlightened self-interest in a way. So in the short term, maybe it does seem that putting other people's needs first is a paradoxical way of living. But in the long term, it kind of opens up a positive spiral where you're more connected to the world and you have better relationships with people. And that creates a kind of network effect, I guess,
Mhm.
where, you're helping people succeed. They want you to succeed. And everybody is kind of growing into the next version of themselves, something like that.
I agree with you regarding long term, but I'd also say even short term, because
Mm,
again, think about it.
mm,
If you're wanting to short term make a sale, is it going to happen because your
yeah.
focus is on yourself, or is it going to be because you're able to communicate focus on that other person?
Mm.
So,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think it's
yeah. You 100%. Now that I think about it, and I think it reminds me of there's like a famous kind of law in copywriting, which is one of the most useful words when you're creating content online and things like that, or just in copy in general. Is that it is you? The word "you" is something that people respond to because, of course, it puts it in the context of their lives, their stories, all these kind of things, and it's just remembering, like you said, people don't really care about other people's self-interest
right,
initially
their
unless
own,
it
right?
benefits them, and it's human nature. And that's what I love about all these laws that you share in the book. They all come down to human nature and working with reality as a whole.
Thank you.
The next law is the law of authenticity, and this is a really interesting law for me because a lot of the work I do is just about being real in our own lives, but the creative process as well as a whole, I think, is a vehicle for becoming more real or more authentic in our own lives. Because as we go through the creative process, we realize what's true, what's not, we realize what works, what doesn't, and we can let go of a lot of the illusions and things we've been holding on to that are stopping us from being authentic or having a good relationship with reality. So the law, as you guys posit it in the book, is that ultimately your real self is the greatest value that you can offer to the world. I think, in a very simplistic, quick way, because I don't want to take up too much time, but in a creative sense, this law is really important because it reminds us to use our work to bring our real selves to the forefront, so that when we are being real, we can connect and add value in all of the ways that you've already kind of talked about.
Yeah, I think that's so very important. And when we show up as ourselves day after day, week after week, month after month, people feel good about us.
Mm,
They feel comfortable with us. They feel safe with us. And that's so
mm,
very important because, in a very inconsistent world, we crave consistency in others, especially
mm,
in those we trust. We want to understand our world, and it's often a very difficult to understand world. So when we do meet someone who shows up the same every time, who we know they're going to be them, okay, we have a lot more trust,
mm,
and that trust is much more sustainable. Authenticity doesn't mean you just do or say whatever you want because
mm,
that's authentic. No, what authenticity means is that we are always acting congruently with our values.
mm. Yeah, that's something that's come up a lot in the work that I do and on this podcast, which is that to live a real life, you need to be aligned with your true values and your true intentions ultimately, instead of hiding yourself from yourself behind some false idea that you've picked up because of
Mhm.
your underlying emotional stuff or your fears about the world or your fears about other people or whatever it is. And I think this law is very important for all the reasons you mentioned, because ultimately it allows you to build relationships where you're more trusted. If you're not being authentic for whatever reason, people can usually pick up on it, even if you think that they can't. That's my view anyway. And I suppose also, as a creative or even a business person, if you're inauthentic, that is reflected in your work, because it means, like we said right at the beginning, you're not using your work to share or express something that's real, which is about giving, which is the next law in the book, but it's about trying to take something from the world to validate whatever it is that's making you be inauthentic in the first place.
Yeah. Very, very great point.
Yeah. The final law, just to kind of wrap this up, is the law of receptivity, which is
Yeah.
ultimately that if you are going to give to the world, then you will be receiving as well. And this is
And
where things kind of get really interesting, I think, and it kind of all comes together, because to receive from life, you have to be open to life, and that means that you have to give to life. This is something that's come up a few times on the podcast now. So I'm really happy, like I've already said a few thousand times now, that you're here talking about this. But
thank
I think from a creative point of view, the best way to make the most of the creative process is to be open to receiving from it, which allows you to get new insights, to kind of bring things up from your unconscious and make them conscious. Basically, you're not blocking yourself if you're open to receiving, and that allows you to give more. So I don't know if that's a little bit too philosophical, but that's my view of it from a creative point of view. But what do you think about that? And how does this law apply to life as well, just in case my
Well,
explanation confused people?
it's breathing out. It's understanding that, yeah, you breathe out. Well, you also have to breathe in.
Mm,
It's not one or the other. You breathe out carbon dioxide, you breathe in oxygen. You breathe out, which is giving. You breathe in, which is receiving. Giving and receiving are not opposite concepts, even though the world around us kind of gives us that message all the time, don't they?
mm,
And so what's important to
wow.
know is that giving and receiving are simply two sides of the very same coin,
Mm,
and they work in tandem. It's not, are you a giver or a receiver? It's, you are a giver and a receiver. And while the giving comes first, I mean, that's universal law. That's human nature. That's physical nature, right? We plant before we harvest. We sow before we reap. We give
mm,
before we receive. You also have to be willing to breathe in. You've got to be willing to allow yourself to receive. Otherwise, it's all for naught. And
mm,
as you
yeah.
said, the more you give, the more you've created that, what we call benevolent context
Mm,
for you to receive. But you've got to allow yourself to do that. When you do, you're able to give more and receive more and give more and receive more. And it's a wonderful, delightful spiral of success.
wow. And I think that's why giving is such a powerful thing, because a lot of the time, when we're caught up in our kind of autopilot way of viewing life and viewing the world, which is that we're supposed to just take from it, it takes us out of the interplay that you just talked about between giving and taking, which is the natural state of things. They're both sides of the same coin. And ultimately, life is about interdependence. And if you can understand that, you can play a role, a more active role in life where you're open to it, you're giving to it, and you're actually aligned with the way things are in reality instead of the way you just think they are because of your conditioning and all the other stuff.
Exactly.
Wow. Um, Bob, that was actually amazing. We've basically run out of time, but I'm kind of impressed with myself for kind of finishing on time. If you know me, I have a tendency to ramble. We basically just blasted through the five laws, which gives, I think, a really kind of great overview of why giving is so important. Just to summarize for everyone listening, the first law is about value, giving value ultimately, and focusing on how you can increase the value that you do give. The second law is the law of compensation, which is that ultimately the income that you get from your work basically is going to be aligned, or it's going to be commensurate to the impact that you have on the world. The third law is about influence, which is that your influence increases with the more people by focusing on what other people want and their needs instead of your own. The fourth law is about authenticity, which is ultimately about the idea that you're greatest value that you can give to the world is your real self. So you need to go through the creative process in order to become more real to do that. And then finally, the law of reciprocity, or whatever it's called. I don't know why I can't say that word today. Which is that if you want to be receiving from life, you need to give to life. Bob, have you got any final words that you want to share, or to kind of summarize all this stuff up? And can you also tell people where they can find you and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I'm pretty easy to reach. It's Burg, Burg, which is my last name, .com. So that's not very creative, I'm afraid, but it is easy to remember. So Burg, Burg.com.
Brilliant. I'll share that in the show notes. And Bob, just thank you so much for coming on here and giving us an overview of this book. Like I said, if so many people have been talking about it recently, which is probably nothing new for you, but it seems to be picking up some kind of momentum in the creative community. I've heard a lot of creatives and other podcasts talking about it. So hopefully this gave people a really good overview. And thanks again for coming on.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.